Sanatana Dharma, an elementary textbook of Hindu religion and ethics, narrated by Vaidyanathan. Part 1, Chapter 4, Sacrifice, Yajna. The idea of performing sacrifice is indeed very familiar in India. However, it is important to understand the principle underlying all sacrifice. The essence of sacrifice is that everyone should sacrifice for the good of others. All sacrifices are meant to teach a person how, ultimately, they ought to sacrifice themselves. The first thing to grasp is that creation is sacrifice. Ishvara confines himself, limits himself in matter, in order that a universe may be made manifest. Shruti and Smriti alike proclaim this truth, as in the Purusha Sukta of Rigveda, or as in the allusion by Sri Krishna to the formal sacrifice that causes the birth of beings. Immersion in matter is, in spiritual language, called death. And Ishvara thus sacrificed himself in order that he might bring into separate being portions of himself, the jivas, who might develop all his powers in matter in an infinite variety of forms. This is the primary sacrifice, and on this is based the law. This also gives us the meaning of sacrifice. It is the pouring out of life for the benefit of others. The law of sacrifice is indeed the law of life for all jivas. In the earlier stages of their growth, they are forcibly sacrificed and progress involuntarily without their own consent or even knowledge. Their forms are violently wrenched away from them, and they are propelled into new ones, a little more developed. For example, the jivas of mineral kingdom are prepared to pass on into the vegetable kingdom by the breaking up of their mineral bodies for the support of plants. The jivas of the vegetable kingdom are prepared to pass on into the animal kingdom by the breaking up of their vegetable bodies for the support of animal life. The jivas of the animal kingdom are prepared to pass on into the human kingdom by the breaking up of their bodies for the support of other animals, savages, and certain type of men. Even the jivas of the human kingdom are prepared to rise into higher planes by the breaking up of their human bodies for the support of other human lives in war and so on. In all these cases, the bodies are sacrificed for the benefit of others, without the assent of the embodied consciousness. Only after untold ages does the jiva recognize in the body the universality of the law and begin to sacrifice his own upadhis deliberately for the good of those around him. This is called self-sacrifice and is the showing forth of the divinity of the jiva, the proof that he is of the nature of Ishvara. A wonderful story of uttermost self-sacrifice is told in Mahabharata. The story of Indra and Vritra is indeed a powerful tale of self-sacrifice. Indra, the king of Devas, was beset by an Asura, Vritra, born of the wrath of a rishi, whom Indra had offended. Vritra, leading the Daityas, defeated Indra and his armies, driving him away from his capital, Amaravati, and taking away his sovereignty. The Devas, along with their king, wandered in exile, repeatedly trying to regain their capital, but being vanquished each time. Finally, they learned that the righteous wrath of a rishi could only be calmed by the voluntary self-sacrifice and compassion of another rishi. Vritra could be defeated by no other weapon than a thunderbolt made from the self-given bones of a holy one. They eagerly went to the rishi Dadichi and told him of their sorrowful tale. Filled with great compassion, Dahichi said, I willingly give you my body to use as you need. When their artisan, Vishwakarma, hesitated to lay a painful hand upon Dadichi's shining body of purity and tapas, Dahichi smiled and said, cover this body with salt. Bring here a herd of cows. They shall lick off the salt and flesh together, and you shall take the bones which you require, and so nothing of this body shall be wasted. This was done, and Vritra fell before the might born of that wonderful sacrifice. The Jiva is guided by the teachings of the rishis, who encourage him to make sacrifices of his possessions for a good that he does not receive immediately. They show him that when a person sacrifices for others, his gifts return to him increased in the future. A person is to sacrifice some of his goods, which may be seen as outlying pieces of himself, and he is promised that this act of self-denial will bring him increased possession. Next, he is taught to make similar sacrifices and to deny himself present enjoyments in order to lay up for himself increased happiness on the other side of death in Swarga. Thus, the practice of sacrificing becomes habitual, and a person, by sacrificing his possessions in the hope of reward, prepares to learn that it is his duty to sacrifice himself in the service of others, and to find in the joy of that sacrifice his reward. Another lesson taught in these sacrifices is the relationship a person bears to all beings around him. He is not a solitary, isolated life. All lives are interdependent and can only prosper permanently by recognizing this interdependence. The rishis taught him to sacrifice daily to the devas, rishis, ancestors, men, and animals, showing him that as all these beings made sacrifices to enrich his life, he had incurred a debt and a duty to them, which he must pay by sacrifice. As he lives on others, he must, in common honesty, live for others. Sacrifice is right, a thing that ought to be done, that is owed. Finally, as the jiva recognizes his parentage and his identity in the nature with Ishvara, sacrifice becomes happiness and a delight. The pouring out of life of others is felt as a joyous exercise of innate divine powers. Instead of seeing how much he can take and how little he can give, he tries to see how little he can take and how much he can give. He begins to carefully consider what he takes for the support of his own upadhis and seeks to minimize the suffering inflicted by the breaking up of lower forms for his support. He abandons foods and amusements that inflict pain on sentient beings and tries to become the friend of all creatures. He realizes that while the preying of animals on animals, of men on men, and the slaughter of animals by men for food or sport are necessary at certain stages of evolution for the development of needed faculties and powers, men should gradually evolve from these practices. They should cultivate the faculties of gentleness, sympathy, and tenderness, regarding the weaker as younger selves to be helped, instead of as victims to be immolated. As a person lives in such thoughts of his non-separatedness from younger selves, he begins to feel more truly his non-separateness from elder selves and from the universal planet, Ishvara. Slowly he realizes that his true function is to live for others as Ishvara lives for all, and that his true happiness lies in becoming a channel through which the life of Ishvara flows, a willing instrument to do the will of Ishvara. Then every action becomes a sacrifice to Ishvara, and actions no longer bind him. Thus, the law of sacrifice also becomes the law of liberation.